All right, I'm going to ask y'all to do something very scary. I want you to move closer to the front. There's like 20 feet between me and the closest person. And this way you can hit me easier, right? You want a chair here? I feel better. Now you can throw things at me and not miss. Brandy, come up front. You can sit next to the teacher like I used to do when I wasn't at the principal's office. All right, thank y'all for coming up closer. I changed my mind about what I was going to talk about today. Originally, I was going to talk about the kingdom of God in the Psalms. And I still think that's a good topic to talk about. It kind of fits with what Brother Dave is doing. But I changed it to talk about death. And the reason I wanted to talk about death is because I'm bothered. I'm probably the only one in this room who's bothered, but I'm bothered when people say pass away instead of just dying. Why can't you just say they died? No, they have to say they passed away, or now they say they passed. Okay, so they passed where? All right, so two things I want you to think about as we get going. First of all, is the phrase passed away even in the Bible? And secondly, did the concept of heaven and hell, which is very popular, I listen to a Christian radio station a lot, and it's because I like their music better than I like the rock and roll music, but no, 99.9. It's called CBN, Christian Bible Network. Anyway, they talk about, most of the speakers talk about going to heaven when you die. I have run across a couple that do not. They just talk about the resurrection. I'm surprised they were allowed them to be on the radio, but most of them do talk about going to heaven, and even the commentators talk about going to heaven. And so my second question for you to think about is that concept, is that a New Testament mystery? And what I mean by mystery, is that something that was revealed more clearly later on by Jesus after the 4,000 years of the Old Testament, like something that was a mystery that the New Testament says was a mystery, was how the Gentiles would be brought into the family of Abraham. It says, behold, I show you a mystery. Anyway, no, that doesn't go with that verse. But anyway, so there are some mysteries or revelations that are in the New Testament that were not clear and plain to the Israelites in the Old Testament. And so the question to you to think about, is that one of them? Because Jesus did talk about hell, and it was interesting because I heard one speaker on the radio said he talked about hell a whole lot more than he talked about heaven. But anyway, so that's why I want to talk about death. What does the Bible say about death? All right, this will be no surprise to you, but the most common word talked about with the meaning of death is death. Both in the Old Testament and New Testament, it's far more prevalent than any other word. Of course, it's a Hebrew word or a Greek word, but they are the ones meaning to die. And generally, particularly in the Greek, I know, and I think in the Hebrew too, there's a noun form and a verb form. The noun form being death, the verb form meaning to die. All right, so what do you think is the second most common word used for death in the Old Testament in particular, but also probably in the New Testament as well. All right, Jason, you got your hand up. Go ahead. Fell asleep. Very good. All right, so what I'm trying to do today is, okay, we've got these words, and we've got to work them into our understanding of what death is all about. What is the state of the dead and all that. All right, so you know what was the original proclamation about death, and what is that? Well, before that. Just go a few hours before that. In the day that thou eatest, thou shalt die. For dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Okay, that's the original proclamation about death. All right, so then you get this big discussion. Well, Adam didn't die that day. So what was God saying? I think it's quite simple. And some people try to twist it and say, and die, and thou shalt die, and stuff like that. I don't think that's very good. All right, so anybody who's been in my class knows you have to get the right answer, you have to agree with me. All right, so what do you think God was saying when he said, in the day thou eatest of it, thou shalt surely die?
Begin to die.
More simple than that. Think of the New Testament. Think of Peter. Walt, is your hand up? And you all know this verse. This is not going to surprise you.
I think he's conveying to him, can't remember the verse I want, but conveying to him that in partaking of that fruit, from that point forward, it is a certainty. You will die, you will return to the dust. Whatever the serpent says to you, too bad, because it ain't right. And I pronounced it. So don't touch it, don't eat this thing, or you will become a dying person and you will die.
Okay, I think it's more simple than that. What did Peter say about a day? A day to the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. And I think that's all that God was saying, was you're not going to live beyond 1,000 years. And that is what happened. Adam, anybody remember how old Adam was when he died?
850? 950.
9 what? 950? Okay. I know it's something less than that. Of course, you know the oldest man was Methuselah, and he was how old?
969.
969. Okay, so nobody in history has lived more than one day in the eyes of God, or 1,000 years. All right, so I think that's all that was saying. All right, so it says, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Now, yes, there has worked into the minds of men this idea of going to heaven or going to hell. But there are verses, and hopefully we're still teaching them to our children, that say very clearly or repeat what God said to Adam in the Garden of Eden. And one of them is Ecclesiastes 3:18 and 19. Does anybody know basically what that says without looking it up? I'm serious. I really hope we're still teaching this to our children.
The living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything.
Let me look it up. That's not what I wrote down. Let's see.
Right after the time to do this, time to do that, time to live, and die.
No, that's Ecclesiastes 3. No, it's, yeah, okay. 18, okay. I'll read it to you. I said in my heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they all have one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place. That's what Tim was saying. All go to one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. So it's the same thing. Solomon's saying the same thing that God told Abraham. So at least for that long, the understanding was the same. All right, also in Psalm 142, or I can't read my writing. That's not 142. Nope, it's not that either. 46. Yeah. Psalm 146, 3 and 4. I'll start it off for you. You can see if you can finish. Put not your trust in princes. Anybody go further? That's right. In whom there's no help. His breath. Keep going. You're right. Keep going. He returned to the dust.
From whence he came.
In that very day his thoughts perish. Okay. So there's another place. It doesn't say who the author of that psalm was. And then you've got some places like Isaiah 38:13. Also, I think it's in a couple of the Psalms. It says, the grave cannot praise thee. So the original teaching about death was carried forward for those number of years. And again, the question is, has it changed? Now, as I think it was Jason said, the second most common word used for death in the Old Testament, we tend to say it because it's a New Testament concept as well, that those who sleep in Christ shall not perish. But it's more prevalent in the Old Testament, actually. And it's, I'm trying to think of the first place it was said. Let me see, I wrote it down. That's correct, Roger. It's in Deuteronomy. Do you remember what he told Moses? He would sleep with his fathers. That's correct. Very good.
That he would sleep with his fathers.
All right. So that's in Deuteronomy 31:16. That's the first place I found that the idea of sleeping, referring to death, was mentioned. But it's also mentioned for a lot of people, particularly the kings. It's mentioned for David in 2 Samuel 7:12 and 1 Kings 1:21. It's mentioned for David again and Psalm 13:3. It's also mentioned in Job. Job 7:21. Let me look at that, because Job, a lot of people think Job lived before Abraham. So that's why I'm going to Job. Job 7:21. Let's make sure I'm right.
I believe that's where he said that the Lord would remember me and I would awake with his likeness.
No, you're thinking, that is Job, but you're thinking of another part of Job. He's speaking to his three friends. He says, why dost thou not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be. So even Job, whenever he lived, had that understanding of what death was. Now, what I'll say surprised me, amazed me, was that sleeping with the fathers. All right, so that was sleeping with the fathers, sleeping in the dust. In the kings, it's often mentioned that kings would sleep with their fathers, or slept with their fathers, the way it says, after they died. And what might be surprising to people is it says the same thing about bad kings as it says about good kings. Okay, so I'll just read them off. David, good. Solomon, fairly good. Jeroboam, not good. Rehoboam, not good. Abijam, not good. Asa, good. Baasha, not good. Omri, really bad. Ahab, even worse. Jehoshaphat, good. Joram, okay. Jehu started out good. Jehoahaz, not so good. Joash, kind of good. Jehoash, not kind of good. Azariah or Uzziah, good most of the time. Jeroboam, probably mentioned it, not good. Jotham, good. Ahaz, terrible. Hezekiah, good. Manasseh, terrible. Jehoiakim, not good. And Uzziah again in 2 Chronicles. All right, so in spite of the fact that the common understanding is that good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell when they died, you've got all these bad kings said that they slept with their fathers. And it equivocates them or equalizes them with the good kings. So the good kings and the bad kings all did the same thing. They slept with the fathers. And so it's kind of an interesting word that the Bible uses to describe dying as sleeping. Because what does that bring to your mind? Waking. Okay,
Waking up.
What about sleeping itself? Unconsciousness, but how about the idea? I'm sorry, Patsy, what did you say? Not permanent, okay. Also, not tormented. You're just, as somebody said, unconscious. And hopefully you sleep pretty good. I don't always, but so it does fit with the idea of returning to the dust, because as Ecclesiastes said, your breath goeth forth, return to dust, and that very day your thoughts perish. So we're going to look now, or in a minute, about hell. What was the Old Testament describing when it talks about hell? Now, does anybody know what is the Hebrew word for hell in the Old Testament? Sheol. If you can spell it, you get extra points. Sheol or something close to that. Okay.
Hey, Randy.
Yes, sir.
Before you get too far away from where we were, there is a difference that's made in this sleeping for the saints and for the wicked, and it adds a word to it that they will, in Jeremiah, concerning the king of Babylon and all those who came against Israel. He says, while they are inflamed in their drunkenness, you have to read the verses before, Jeremiah 51:39, I will prepare for them a feast and make them drunk, that they may become merry, then sleep a perpetual sleep and not awake, declares the Lord. So the word perpetual gets added to that word sleep, which means no resurrection is coming. It's not temporary, it's forever. The difference with many sleeping with your fathers, especially with the righteous men, that it's going to be temporary because they look forward to that judgment.
All right, I'm going to come to that point, but Walter's got his hand up. Go ahead, Walter.
Just wanted to point out that in the Old Testament, slept with the fathers is a Hebrew idiom. So, and of course you got to say, oh, if it's an idiom, it means something, it has some meaning. It literally in their language means to die and to be buried. So if you said that he slept with his fathers, they said, you're dead and you're buried. That's what it means to them.
And that's exactly the way they understood it too. All right, so what is the primary verse in the Old Testament that uses the word sleeping, where there is this, for some, there is a temporary aspect to it? And it gets quoted all the time. I want you to notice it because it does have the word sleeping in it, or sleep in it. And if I tell you, you're going to say, oh yeah, I know that. Does anybody know off the top of their head? Roger, you know? Okay.
I think 12, where it says that, how did it go, that many that are in the grave, that sleep in the dust, shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting contempt.
You learned your memory verses as a child. Good for you. That's exactly right. David, you were saying it too. All right, so, and that is backed up by the New Testament, some verses in the New Testament. But when you talk about, I want to talk about hell because that is the common thinking among many Christian believers. Not for themselves, of course, but for other people. So, Sheol, you mentioned Sheol. Now, what you might not know, which was a kind of surprise to me, is that that word is translated hell 31 times and the grave 30 times. It's translated the pit 3 times. But you can see, I was trying to say, okay, so the King James translators, did they have a bias that they lean towards one word or the other? And sometimes I could see a bias, but sometimes they weren't consistent in their bias. So I don't know if they really had a bias or not, but it was certainly a question they would have to answer every time they came across that word, Sheol, is how do we put it in English? Do we put it as the grave? Do we put it as hell, which they did believe in? Or do we put it as the pit, which the pit has a certain context to it? Does anybody, the pit is just what you think of as a pit. It's a hole in the ground, like as a dug hole, and it goes down a certain depth. All right, so before we get to, and we're going to look at verses that translate it one way or translate it the other. Okay, before we get there, there is another verse in Ecclesiastes that says basically the same thing. And they used to really drill this into us when we were at camp, when we were young. And so I don't think too many of y'all went to camp. Tim and Roger did. Robert, did you go to camp? Okay, I'll start it out for you. 9:10, but that's that. Do you remember what it says, brother? You must have learned it too.
They will die, but the dead know not anything.
Okay.
Neither have they any more hope, for the memory of them is forgotten.
Neither have they any more a reward. Okay, your translation said hope. Okay, let's go down 5 verses in your head. I'll start it out for you because I mean this was, well, the theme verse of camp was always what? You remember it? What's that? No. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. That's if you go to camp, that sign is still there. But that's always been from the beginning, 60-some years ago, the theme of the camp. All right, 9:10. I'll start it out for you. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do,
do it heartily as if unto the Lord.
do with all your might. I was going to say, Jason, I don't know what translation you got, but I think you're thinking of a different verse. All right, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. So that's another one that says you're simply unconscious in the grave. All right, so we got to explore hell. But before we get that, I want to go to the New Testament because Jesus used the word hell more than anybody. And when Jesus used the word hell, he didn't speak English. What Greek word was he using? Gehenna, right. All right, Rob, what was Gehenna? What does that mean?
It was a place outside of the city where they burnt trash.
They burnt
and
trash.
And it was an eternally burning fire because there was always trash to be burnt. So it was an unquenchable flame.
And I think they also burnt criminals who weren't claimed by other people. But trash was the main thing, is right. So it was a fire that was kept burning forever and ever and ever because of the trash. All right. So there's another word in the New Testament, another Greek word translated as hell. Do you know what that word is? It's not Hades. Very good. And what was Hades to the Greeks? What did that word mean to them? Yeah. It's basically where the dead are. It's basically what it's saying. Okay. And Jesus used that word some. It's used more in other books like Acts. Paul never used the word Gehenna, probably because the Gentiles wouldn't hardly know what that meant. But he only used Hades a couple of times. Luke used it a couple of times in Acts. All right, so another well-known verse I want you to bring to the top of your minds is Psalm 16, which is a prophecy about Christ. It's quoted in the New Testament, and what does that say? It has the word hell in it in both Old and New Testaments. To hell, okay. That was
It actually transliterates in my version. It says Sheol.
Does it? Okay. Thou will not leave my soul in Sheol, what do you want to say? Neither will thou let thy Holy One see corruption or see decay. Okay. And
This is a very significant verse of reasoning because, one, it implies that Christ went to hell, and it also implies that one can come back from hell and be in the kingdom of God. So think about that. The world would not understand that way. Anybody who goes to hell is gone forever and they're going to be in torment forever. But it shows that you can go to hell, just like it said that David is not ascended into the heavens, but he's both dead and buried, or he's in hell, and he will be restored at some point. So anyway, I just want to throw that out as a point of extreme importance of reasoning concerning.
it's very important. Okay,
You
well,
can be recovered from hell.
Walter, make your comment, then I'll make a comment. Or ask a question. I'm going to ask another question.
I was going to say, it's probably a good time, if I'm ahead of you, then stop me, but you were talking about bias. There's an important bias here that if we're teaching this to others, we've got to know about. All right, there are two different classes of people who are speaking and writing here. You've got the Hebrew and you've got the Greek. If you're brought up Greek, That's the word set that's in your mind you're going to use, even if you think and mean this thing to you, right? If you're brought up as a Hebrew, you're going to use a different set of words, except when you're in public and you have to speak Greek and all that kind of stuff. So what you can see here is the bias. Some of the authors, knowing their audience was Greek, used Greek words, and I suspect when Paul used it, he would have explained greatly, on the side what he's really talking about. Because to his Hebrew audience, if he said Sheol, they all knew exactly what he was talking about. No problem at all. So just that's an important bias that as we're teaching others, we got to say, hey, look at the meaning of this word and what it's from and what audience it's made for.
Yeah, I'll say this too, that Paul taught a whole lot more than we have in our Bibles. Because he mentioned that in some of his letters. Okay, so the question to you is, you got this verse that says in the Psalms, thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither will you let your Holy One see corruption. How soon after the resurrection of Jesus from the dead was that preached?
When Jesus talked to the men on the road to Emmaus.
Possibly, but he didn't mention that in the Bible. But this is a specific quoting of that verse. Boy, Roger, you're starring today. Yes, it was the day of Pentecost. Peter mentioned it in his. So, go ahead, Tim.
Didn't after Jesus raised from the dead, 500 others were raised from the dead, or some figure?
500 witnesses to his resurrection. It does say
Right,
some of the saints that were dead, that were sleeping, arose. But
arose.
the 500 number comes from the witnesses.
The witnesses, yeah. But there was a number that actually rose from
Yeah,
the dead.
it doesn't say specific
After.
number.
It
That's-
reads as if it's before his resurrection.
No,
After.
it's after, right. All right, Roger, you want to say something more?
Were after his resurrection, those that were raised then there's a group that were raised at his death.
Yeah, again, it doesn't give the number that were raised.
Yeah.
The 500 is the 500 witnesses that Paul said saw him alive after his death. All right. So the Jews, he was speaking to Jews on the day of Pentecost, and they would have understood it in the Old Testament way of teaching it, which was Sheol was the place of the dead, like Hades. Since I don't know, he may have used, in the New Testament, it does use the word Hades when he's speaking on the day of Pentecost. He may have used that to his audience, but since they were Jews, he possibly did not. He probably used Sheol. Okay.
Got a hand.
Got another hand? Okay, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
have a question that even back when Ecclesiastes was being written, people felt that there was something, they go somewhere, because in Ecclesiastes 3:21 it says, who knows the spirit of man, whether it goes upward, and the spirit of the animal, whether it goes downward to the earth?
That is a legitimate question, yes. And I'm not going to try to answer that today. Walter, you got another comment? Go ahead.
My memory's a little faulty these days, but as I recall, I remember having questions about the spirit going up and spirit going down, not being a Christadelphian. And someone reminded me, and I can't remember the verse, and you'll have to help me, but that what they're speaking of is the life that God gave you that makes you alive. It returns to him, or it stays in the ground, just like poor old Abel's blood who cried to God. Well, the blood isn't a person, but you understand the concept. The life is what he's talking about there. So the life either returns to God that way, or it's gone. And that's how we look for resurrection, right? God knows us, remembers us, and will return life to us. All
right, so to support that idea, what can you quote from Genesis to support the idea that the life is separate from the body. Very good, Rob. You're doing really well today. All right, so I tend to, in my own mind, because I'm not as intelligent as most of you, but in my own mind, I liken it to electricity. If you got a television or a stereo or a computer or whatever, and you pull the plug, the equipment's still there, but it can't do a thing. It's that plug going into it that makes it a working piece of equipment. And the same way with the breath of life, when God causes your breath to go away, the body's still there, because it decays after a while, but it can't function. It doesn't have the ability to function. Wait, Walter was first, I think.
I'm real quick. Just one way I've heard it put, and I think it fits real well, is called divine spark. It's a divine spark from God, and when God said, if I withdraw my spirit, all flesh would perish, that spark would be removed. So we all have a divine spark that keeps us alive.
Yeah, Ecclesiastes 12:7 says, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it.
Okay, so there's a very clear statement.
So, when you're teaching younger kids, you have to get the concept so they can understand. So when I was doing Sunday school, I said, hey, here's an easy way to think of this. Everybody knows what the Energizer Bunny is, right? That dude's running around. What makes him work? And of course, the kids all say, hey, he's got a battery. I said, so you take the battery out, that's the life, the energy that makes it what it is, but it's still there. And so the time comes when God will put the battery back in, for a simple, straightforward child way of describing things.
That's quite good. And if I was teaching children, I would say that Sheol means the grave, and that's what generally they're taught. And I think that's a clean way to teach it, but I think it's incomplete. And so y'all are not children, so I was going to go into more. What time am I supposed to stop talking? Huh? I mean, are they supposed to be coming up at 20 after?
Yeah.
I think he just rang the bell.
Ding, ding, ding.
All right, so what I was going to do, well, I'll do it in 2 minutes. When you see the word hell or Sheol, you have to figure out what it's saying. It's because what it's saying is common to when it's translated grave and when it's translated hell. So they are interchangeable words in the biblical sense. And so we've got to get into our minds what is the complete concept that would allow both those words to be used. And I think the secret is the word Hades in the New Testament. As somebody said, it's the place of the dead. And that's what Sheol means in the Old Testament. It's the place of the dead, or the state of the dead. And so therefore it can be used to describe good people and bad people also. And I think when you read that verse, whether when you read it as grave or read it as hell, put that concept in your mind that that's what you're reading. It's not I'm confused because it says the word hell here, or I'm fine with it because it says the word grave. Like I said, there seems to be no clean-cut bias that I've found to go to one word or the other by the translators in 1611. So, Walter, I'll let you have the last thought.
Having been one who didn't grow up with all the opportunities to hear these things every Sunday, every day in Sunday school, I'm going to shamelessly say to you, you have a diglot, you have a Strom's, you have ways that when you study this word, look at what the words were meant and how they were translated. It helps so much to get the real meaning of things. Not always perfect, but it's better than guessing at what they mean.
All right, I'll close with this thought, that to do this class, I wrote down every time the word is used. And it took me quite a while to do it. But I have found over the years that when I handwrite verses, they stay in my mind a lot longer than if I just read them. So I encourage you to take the time when you're considering a subject in the Bible to handwrite the verse, get a notebook like this and just start writing. And because then it will, as you're writing, it goes into your mind and you'll understand it better, in my opinion. All right, and please make sure that the children learn these verses that you learned as a child. You're hurting them if you don't teach it to them. Thank you. Next week, Brother David's supposed to be back, and